Okay. Well, welcome everyone. It really is. It's an honor and it's a pleasure to be with you again. I was actually up in your centre very shortly before the pandemic hit, and we also had to go into the first phase of lockdown. And interestingly enough, the talk I gave then was about the importance of relationships. And to some extent, there's a lot of overlap between what I'm going to talk about today. Obviously, we're going to focus more on the family. And we're talking with Lena. We came up with the title Family School. But again, I was honored and humble. And I say humble because I started to reflect when she first invited me to do this talk. I said, no, just give me a little while. I need to study because when you talk about the book Family Constellations, I wasn't sure what that implied. Fortunately, I did have Joanna Gianzzi's book in my bookcase. I've accumulated a lot of books, and embarrassingly, a lot of them I haven't even read yet. So when Lena asked me to speak, I said, let me read the book first and see if I can understand it well enough to be able to contribute to your group. And after reading it, I found an amazing volume of information, and it got me reflecting on my family. I'm originally from England, but when I started thinking about my family, I started to realize there was a lot of almost what they call skeletons in the closet, particularly on my father's side. His mother actually ran off when he was, I think, a young boy, never to be known again. I never really got to the bottom of what happened to her. My grandfather married again, but then one of his two other brothers, there were three boys, and one of them disappeared, and there was no contact with them for, I think about 30, 40 years. So, and then I look at my own life, and I've had some choices in my own life. I've been married now 3 times, very happily. But I look back and start saying, well, am I qualified to talk about family school? So for me, this has been a fantastic learning experience. The more I looked into this subject, the more I found and the more I've learned. So hopefully I can transmit some of that to you tonight, and hopefully you will gain something from it. Worst case scenario, if you don't learn very much, I've learned a lot. So I'm grateful again for this learning process. But just to talk a little bit about myself, some of you may know me, some not, but I'm relatively new to Spiritism. I know a lot of my Spiritist friends and colleagues, and majority were born in Brazil, let's be honest. And I was fortunate to spend many of my years in life in Brazil. I got a transfer with my company and ended up going to São Paulo, not speaking a word of Portuguese, and ended up spending 11 years in total in Brazil. And so I heard about Spiritism, never involved with it, but it's now about 8 or 9 years ago, I was at a phase of my life with some personal issues and problems to resolve, and I really started looking for something spiritual. I was recommended, or I was asked to invited to Conscious Living, and initially somewhat reluctant. I'm just stepping aside. I came back. I come from a very much a scientific sort of thinking, left thinking. Studied physics at university, and always followed science and the evolvement of science. So Spiritism was something of a challenge, let's be honest, a challenge. But that being said, I've been now, say, 8, 9 years, started going more regularly to the Sunday meetings, and then to a study group on the Spirit's book with Susanna Simons, who I'm sure you all know, and then we went to the gospel and through. And today I'm very much involved. I'm fortunate now to be retired, so I've got a lot of free time. No, I wouldn't say free time, but a lot more time than I had when I was working. And I find I'm spending more and more time studying, and the more I study, the more I enjoy and the more I find solace and purpose in life because of what Spiritism has to offer. I think one of the beauties I find in Spiritism is that it challenges you to not accept, the doctrine is not laid down and, you must believe in this, you must believe in that. No, it's quite the contrary. You're encouraged to challenge and to discover more and see how it fits to your own beliefs and your own concepts of the life and reality and philosophy, where you're going, where you came from. So that's something I've always really enjoyed. And what I like to do with my studies these days is really always try and reach out to, not just in Spiritism. I don't want to get siloed into being a Spiritist and just the Spiritist literature, but see how I can reconcile that with the events of the world, with the increasing knowledge of science. And science these days is in so many disciplines, particularly when we talk about this family school. We talk about, evolution of the human race and why we're different than animals, why we bind together in families, whereas animals, basically, we'll talk about this later, abandon the young as soon as the young can take care of themselves. Why are we different? So anyway, with that said, as a bit of an introduction, what I've done, I've structured the talk in 7 parts. And Evelina, if you could pass on to the next slide for me. Okay, so I'm going to start. That was the introduction I've just given you. And we're going to go a little bit into evolution, from Darwin, from why, and how the earth was formed and how that led to life, and then Homo sapiens, and then to family and to society. And I think there's a lot of learning there. And I think it helps us understand, again, why we're different and why we have this flame inside us to connect. And we'll get more into detail of that as we go along. I'm going to touch a little bit on Genesis. This is Kardec's Genesis in chapter 10 and 11, organic Genesis and spiritual Genesis, because evolution really just looks at the material side, and we've got to look at the spiritual side, and I bring that in with Genesis. I'm going to look at the law of society with the book of Kardec, from the Spirit's book and the third part, the laws. And then I'm going to branch out a little bit. I'm going to talk about family constellations. I know that's the title of Joanna de Angelis' book. But I'm going to, when I'm in my research to talk about this, I started just Googling family constellations and came across, and some of you may have heard of a German psychiatrist who developed a technique called family and systemic constellations. And what I find very interesting about this is that I also found a very good talk by David Wlakden. It's actually in 2 parts. It's almost 3 hours of talk. But he talks so much about and praises the work of this Bert Hellinger, who developed this therapy really for resolving family issues. And we're going to talk about that. I'm not an expert, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I think there's some good learnings there. And maybe some of you who are having some issues in family can find some leaders there that might help you. Then I'm going to talk about current challenges. So there's a lot of challenges in today's society, which is really, I would say, threatening the family, but it's making family unity so much more difficult. And then finally, I'm going to end up with a few conclusions and what I hope you can take away from this half hour, 40 minutes, or whatever, from my talk. So let's go straight into evolution. And perhaps, Linda, you could expand that slide so it's a bit bigger for us. Can you expand it? There we go. Beautiful. Okay, so let's go back to our planet Earth, and she was born about 4.5 billion years ago. One thing I always find when we talk about, time from the Big Bang or time from the planet Earth, when you talk about billions of years, it's really difficult to comprehend. So what I've done here is just represented from the life of the planet Earth, this 4.5 billion years in just 1 year. So in other words, on December the 31st at midnight, Earth was born, and today we're at the 31st of December, midnight again, a year on, okay? So we started a year ago, and then the first thing that, I just want to pull out a few milestones, but the first signs of life occurred about 4 billion years ago. That was equated to about mid-February. Those are just single-cell organisms, very simple organisms. One of those developed later on to viruses and bacteria, but viruses, of course, we know today are still around, very much so. They've mutated, they've adapted, but basically they're the same living organisms that rely on the host. And in the case of COVID-19, needs the human being. And then later on, the next bullet, please, we have the start of photosynthesis. Up until that time, after the initial cooling of the Earth, and eventually the condensation of water, the whole of the surface of planet Earth was covered in water. But then about midway through the year, we started with photosynthesis, and that started to use the energy from the sun to convert CO2, actually earlier on even iron, into oxygen, and that started to increase in quantity first in the oceans and then in the atmosphere. And that led to the first multicellular organism. These are the more complex organisms that gives rise to our plants and animals and eventually us. So that we're already into October now. So just to give you an idea of the time span, we're already into October. Another major milestone was what they call the Cambrian explosion. Cambrian was a period of time in all these periods of the development of the Earth and so on. But it was a huge increase in all the different diversity of all the animals and species and plants and so on. But that was shortly followed thereafter by colonizing the land. The life went from the Earth, from the sea, to the Earth, and first by insects and then fish and then tetrapods, the four-legged animals, which eventually became two-legged with us. And that's end of November, so we're getting pretty close to the end of the year. Mid-December is about 65 million years ago, but in this my yearly calendar here, equivalent to mid-December, we had the dinosaur extinction, where 95% of all the species on the Earth, but less so the mammals, thank goodness, because they wouldn't be here, were made extinct, and then reflects what's happening today with the emissions of the gases that are killing the atmosphere and warming the planet, and that happened before, so it's not the first time. In fact, throughout the history of the Earth, we've had 5, 6, even some say 7 major extinctions. And finally, the Hominidae genus, which is our nearest relatives, we started to diverge from chimpanzees and bonobos. And here we're at mid-December, so we've had all this year, but it's only mid-December that we start to see the start of the initial of the development of the human race. So let's move on to the next slide. So we talked about the evolution of Earth, and as I said, the hominids started about 12 hours ago. That's when we first started to, which is about 6 million years ago, 12 hours ago, we started to separate. Eventually, we got fully bipedal, walking on 2 feet around 6 o'clock. So only 6 hours ago. Time flies, right? And one of the repercussions of bipedalism was that the bone structure to support the back in the vertical position had to narrow. And I've forgotten the name of it. Anyway, the repercussions of that was that it became more and more difficult for the females to give birth. So nature and evolution adapted so that the babies were born with smaller heads and softer heads, and the development of the brain and the head and the brain and the skull started to continue after birth. And that really is another driver for why we Homo sapiens have this need for parenthood. We cannot survive on our own. You see, pictures of animals like a foal being born from a horse, and immediately that foal will jump up, and in 10 minutes it's running around. Yes, it needs its mother's milk, but shortly thereafter it's on its own. And we'll talk a little bit more about the difference between animals and humans. The Neanderthals, our nearest cousin. Can you just click there again, Lena? I think there's a picture there that should come up. I don't know if it does. Well, I had a picture of all the different hominids from Homo erectus. No, go back again, please. I don't know what happened. I lost that picture. Homo erectus, and then right to the Neanderthals and us. And they're not, we don't descend one from the other, but we're all cousins. But about 5 minutes to midnight, again, 5 minutes to midnight on December the 31st, which represents only about 50 to 30,000 years ago, we had the onset of what we call Homo sapien behavioral modernity. And this is we, completely different than all the other animal species, adapted abstract thinking. We started to express in art and music, dance. Technologies, of course, technologies at this time were knives and sewing, very simple technologies, but very crucial for our development. And then we started to develop this cumulative cultural adaptation, social norms, and obviously developed through language. So again, we look at Homo sapiens compared with all the other life that's developed on planet Earth. It's very, very recent. So next slide, let's talk about the development of the family and society, the human family. So it started around, supposedly around 10,000 years ago. We were all hunter-gatherers. We just existed in small family units. We'd roam around searching for food and roots and berries and small mammals to eat, to survive. But around 5,000 years ago, which represents now 4 seconds ago in our yearly calendar, we come into the agricultural revolution. And this really was the big change. This is the big change. And in a way, we look at it from a point of view of evolution. It was a really bad step because normally evolution is, the survival of the fittest, modifications, mutations, adaptations through environmental pressures tend to promote the survival of the fittest. But when we went to the agricultural revolution, it was really a step backwards in terms of our material bodies. And there's 2 reasons for that. One is that our diet before, which was very diverse in terms of, fruits, vegetables, animals, a lot of variety. We suddenly started to live together and live in small groups and live in we domesticated animals and domesticated plants. So our range of intake in terms of vitamin and the food, the quality of the food we're eating, really diminished significantly. And consequently, when we started the agricultural revolution, lifespan started to fall. So again, from an evolutionary point of view, it seemed a step backwards. But the other factor about it, I think it's worthwhile pointing out as well, when we were hunter-gatherers, we were roaming around continuously. When we started to live in small communities and started to domesticate plants and animals, we came into a lot more closer contact, not only with the animals, and we're seeing that being reflected today with the COVID-19. It was this close proximity to animals that really caused this jump of a virus from the animals to the humans. But also, we were living in basically our own ways. Those days, the ideas of cleanliness and hygiene and so on were very rudimentary. So we really suffered. But why did we evolve in this format? And again, we'll get more into the Spiritist point of view on this, but the driver was really the need, this flame we have inside us to be together, to learn from each other, and to grow. So, from the smaller family units of the hunter-gatherers, we developed into larger family units, then tribe, villages, and of course now into towns, cities, etc., etc. The rest is, you could say, history. Okay, so let's go now to Genesis. And what I find fascinating about Genesis is in chapter 10, which is organic Genesis, and chapter 11, the spiritual Genesis. In chapter 10, Kardec really reiterates what Darwin, because the original book of the Spirit's book was published in 1857, but that was only the 500-page version. And the Spirit's book is now with 1,019 questions. Was published in, I'm not sure, it's 60 or 61. And The Origin of Species by Darwin was published in 68, I think it was. So between those two, when he published the second version of the Spiritist book, Darwin's theory of evolution, or it was then called theory of evolution, because there was limited supporting evidence. Today, I think we do not call it the theory, we call it the science of evolution, because we got so much more information. But he basically reflects on that. But then he brings in chapter 11, the spiritual genesis. And this is the beauty of Spiritism to me. So in that end of chapter 10, closing out the organic genesis, he says, and I'm referring to this box on the right here, Spiritism walks hand in hand with materialism on the terrain of matter. It accepts everything that materialism accepts, but at the point that materialism stops, Spiritism goes further. Spiritism, and materialism are like two travelers who travel together from the same starting point. Having gone a certain distance, one says, I cannot go any further, while the other continues on his way and discovers a whole new world. And then finally ends up by saying, having come to this point with Genesis, materialism stops, where Spiritism carries on the research in the realm of spiritual genesis. And what I love about this is that we, as a scientist, you think, yes, we got the DNA and all this past experiences, this past learning, this exposure and adaptation to the environment is reflected in the organic body through the DNA. But what Spiritism brings is there's two components to the incarnate being. There's the organic body, yes, but there's also the spiritual body. So the perispirit, which I've got a little representation of here, it brings with it all those experiences in terms of intellectual and moral development and fuses those with the body. So we have these two guidelines, these two experiences from the past which guide us forward. So this is what the link I like with the Spiritism and again science in terms of evolution. Okay, so let's move on, and I want to talk a little bit about what really is the key word for me in terms of Spiritism, and that's reincarnation. Yes, we're all spirits that live multiple lives. Okay, we're oh gosh, I always forget this word. Immortal spirits. Okay, it came to me. Immortal spirits. And we, believe in this reincarnation process. And this is what really makes Spiritism so plausible, so believable for me. It answers so many questions. But I went to the book of After Death by Leon Denis, and in chapter 41, which he talks about reincarnation, he brings this for us here, and I want to read this with you and share it with you. Similar things are attracted to each other, and it is due to this law of attraction and harmony that the spirits of the same order, who present analogous character and tendencies, become close and follow one another throughout their multiple existences, incarnating together and constituting homogeneous families. So he's bringing to us, not only do we have the blood relationships, but we're also continually reincarnating with the same group. They're the same attracted to each other, and things that we perhaps didn't resolve in the past, we come back together in the family, maybe this time as a mother, where before you were a son, or whatever the relationship, whatever the need to learn, the learning need is. And this is what, again, emphasizes the importance of the family school. Okay, let's move on. Can I have the next slide? Okay, so let's go to the Spirit's book, and in question 766, Kardec asks, is societal life natural? And the Spirit answers, certainly. God has made humans for living in society. Otherwise, it would have been needless for God to have endowed them with speech and all the other faculties necessary for a life of relationships. So he's made us for living in society. That is our path forward. And I particularly, when I first read this, he's endowed them with speech and all the other faculties. What do you mean by the faculties? I think, obviously, the five senses speech, the five senses are faculties of the human being. But I think it's going beyond, because humans have more than just that, okay? They have the emotions, they have the feelings, they have reactions, they have sensitivity, they have positive things like tenderness and empathy and eventually love. But we also have the what we call vices, the anger, the jealousy, the hate, and so on. So he's given us these faculties, and he's given us the free will, of course, to be able to discern between the two. So let's move on to the next question, which is, I think I skipped a few here, but I just want to go to the end, towards the end of this chapter. And he talks about family ties. And he asks if family ties are important. And he asks about animals too. Specifically, he goes to the Spirit and asks about, what's the difference between animals and us? And then the Spirit's reply, human beings have a different destiny than that of animals. For humans, there is something beyond physical needs. There is the need to progress, and this is key, the need to progress. Social ties are necessary for progress. Family ties are summed up in social ties. Hence, family ties are a law of nature. God has thus willed that humans learn to love one another as brothers and sisters. So this is our starting point. And he goes on to say what happens if families begin to destructure and diminish. And in 775 at the bottom there, the Spirit's answer very simply with these 4 words, a magnification of selfishness. So this is key. This is key. And in the same chapter, he talks about, what would happen if somebody locked themselves away in a cave, becomes a hermit. And of course, Kardec says that is not what we're designed for. We will not advance. When I gave the talk on the importance of relationships at the centre with you, I think early April, I brought up the film of Tom Hanks in Castaway, when he was, castaway on an island, and over a period of time became, more and more, I wouldn't say brutish, but the lack of social contact was a very big challenge. And what he did, he took a basketball, which he found, he called it Wilson, because it was made by Wilson, but he called it Wilson, put a face on it. And that became his almost substitute guardian angel, because we had this desire this need to develop relationships, and that will help us helping us with our moral evolution. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. I want to talk a little bit about family constellations. I know that's the name of the book of Joanna de Angelis, but there's a lot more to it. In fact, she did not invent that phrase, and neither did this gentleman here, Bert Hellinger. It came actually from an Austrian psychiatrist earlier on, but really became famous and has been became a very strong tool in helping families overcome difficulties, a therapy, if you like. So Bert Hellinger, who only died last year, he started off, he was German, he was actually born Anton Hellinger, but he developed this psychotherapy with family constellation. He calls it systemic constellations. He was Catholic, went to Catholic college and ordained as a priest. He later studied psychiatry and actually left the church, but that was after he spent 16 years as a missionary in South Africa. And he really was working with the Zulu tribe, as they're called then. But he got really deeply involved with them, learned the language fluently and all the culture. And I'm sure that had a big influence on him, because when you look at the more indigenous cultures around the world, be it, the Indian cultures here in the US or Aborigines in Australia, and some of the African older cultures that's been kept isolated, the emphasis on family and ancestors and respect between the generations becomes so important. So he developed these tools, and later on he called them even movements of the spirit mind. And it's now, in fact, when I first Googled this, I found like a dozen centers here in Miami that offer this therapy and technique to individuals or families, or even, in fact, groups and industries where to help them to become more fluid and more coordinate better together. Give me the next slide, Lena, please. I'm not an expert on psychiatry or psychotherapy, but it's very interesting. And he talks about three basic principles: order, belonging, and balance. And again, one of the things that I found that gave it a lot more plausibility and tying in with Spiritism is that, in fact, Divaldo Franco, who was who channeled the book of Joanna de Angelis, Family Constellations, he has a two-part talk, actually 3 hours altogether, on family constellation, and he praises the work of Bert Hellinger. And so just quickly, he brings forward these three basic principles. One is this order or hierarchy, and really what's behind that is respect or lack of respect. And the point he brings is that the parents should always be respected by the children, no matter what they do, how wrong they are, how ignorant they are compared to the child. And these days, this difference between the educational levels and the technology, and we'll come on to talk a little bit about that later on, but it becomes more challenging to maintain that respect. And it also applies to older sisters and younger brothers and so on. So the order in which the family tree proceeds, it should be also reflected in a hierarchy of respect and order. Second thing is there's a sense of belonging. All members are part of the whole. So when someone, maybe one of the son turns, let's say, a drug addict or something, the family disowns him, the family as a whole suffers because it upsets the dynamic of the whole family. And then he talks about balance and the need for balance. And perhaps an example of that is it's important that, say, a husband and wife give and receive in equilibrium. The husband shouldn't, give lots of gifts to the wife, and then the wife cannot give in return, and it becomes unbalanced. So there should always be a balance of what to give and what to receive. Ideally, you should always try and give a little bit more, so then your partner will then also give you a bit more, and then you grow. So I'm not going to go further into this. I think it is really, I've just learned about this, and I felt, again, I think it's worthwhile bringing it because of the endorsement that Divaldo Franco brings to this topic. And maybe if anyone out there having some serious challenges where the dynamics of the family are going through some difficult times, maybe there's something to look into. Okay, so I'm coming to the end. I didn't want to go on too long today. I want to try and leave some time open for maybe questions or comments or discussion. But let's just look now at some of the challenges that our families are facing these days. And I've put down a few here. But obviously, COVID-19 has become a major challenge. It's really disrupted a lot of families, and in so many different ways. But obviously, one of them is that families are being forced to come together in a way that maybe we haven't for a long time. So these are challenges, but they're also opportunities. Children studying from home, parents working from home, lack of contact with colleagues, so isolation. So it really has brought home the need to live together, and a lot of families have not adapted. A lot of parents delegate the education of the children to the school, thinking the school's responsible, I'm not responsible. Now they're more responsible, and this whole contact has created some challenges to the family unit. And some of that has probably overlapped in some of the political and social disturbances we're seeing now, not from just Black Lives Matter, but some of the social inequalities, the way COVID-19 is affecting our society in different ways. Of course, cultural changes. There's a constant decrease of the marriage rates. The divorce rate is still going up. Perhaps one of the good news I should put there is abortion rates are falling, particularly in younger teenagers. So there's some good news there. But there's still a lot of societal challenges on the family. I put here also technology, because technology advancing so fast so that often the children are just in a different plane than the parents, and it becomes very different for the parents. And it's also separating us. I don't know, the days when we used to go to a restaurant and you look around the restaurant, you see maybe a family of four sat at the table, and you see mother and father on their cell phone texting maybe to each other, I don't know, and the two kids glued to an iPad playing games or whatever. It seems technology is really beginning to break up some of this family unity. And, many families will counteract that by saying, okay, we're having our dinner tonight, cell phones here, we're going to lock them away. Actually, I watched on Netflix an excellent film. I think it was called The Social Dilemma, but really it's about the impact on technology and particularly on the family. So how the family school is affected. And then, of course, it's still this continual drive towards materialism, to having things rather than values, rather than relationships. And all of these come together and really challenge the way we educate our children. So again, food for thought. None of these there are more opportunities, and from a more spiritualist point of view, this is all part of the trials and expiations and the planet of transition. There are a lot of very positive things that are going on, and I think, I think you see signs, you see amazing individuals that maybe they're being reincarnated here from more advanced worlds. That's what the whole planetary transitions is all about. But there are good signs as well. But it's a wake-up call, and we're all aware of this, I'm sure. So finally, just to sum up, I'd like to, if you could go to the next slide, please, Lena. All right, so just in summary, again, we humans are hardwired through our DNA, and then we have the past intellectual moral experience from our perispirit to advance. We're the combination of the two is we must advance. We can only advance intellectually, morally together, sometimes less than others, in some lifetimes less than others, in some lifetimes more. And that evolution, that interaction is only, that advancement is only through interaction with others. Again, if we're isolated on a desert island, how can one develop morals? How can one do unto others as you want them to do unto you when there's nobody there to do it with? So we cannot evolve. We need interactions, we need relationships, and the family unit is the first school for learning and the real guidance for the advancement of the spirit. And once we can do that, once that will flow out, that will blossom out into not just the neighborhood, the greater family, but also into society. And it only follows from that harmonious and loving family. That is the start. Just going back to family constellations from Joanna Jones, I got this quote from there. She talks, Maria Montessori, who basically invented a whole new teaching methods on how we should encourage and better teach our children. And she was asked the question, when should we start educating our children? And her answer was, education of offspring should start 20 years before they are born. So think about that. We're all in the process of learning, and we've got to learn now, and our children have got to learn so they can develop and they can be better teachers to their children. And if we look at some of the quotations about what is education, I like this one here. We must become what we wish to teach. So we've got to teach by example. We've got to show our children. We've got to show our family. We don't teach them, we show them. We show them through example. Okay, I just want to finalize with the next slide, which is from Family Constellations, Devaldo Frankel's book, and chapter 2, which I know Lena just said last week. I participated in that group, and I was very grateful for that opportunity. And I really recommend, for those of you who are watching and who perhaps haven't joined the study group, really do. It's an amazing book. If you can't even join the group, read the book. Read the book. And on a broader basis, the only way to really understand Spiritism is to study. And the good thing is now in English, we have a real huge resources in terms of videos, in terms of books. There's over 100 books, well over 100 books now. Most of Emmanuel books, Leon Denis, and we talked about today, and so on. So let's get into this. Is just a closing of chapter 2, which is very, very eloquent, very beautiful, and I think really sums up the family school. So she says, in the animal kingdom, once the offspring is able to secure food on its own, its parents abandon it, except in rare species when this happens even before. It's different in humans. The ties between parents and children are never broken, even when relationships are strained. They are simply postponed to another reincarnation, a new opportunity where experiences are repeated until the achievement of affectionate harmony and bonding are reached. Divine laws states that only through love can the spirit find true fulfillment. This sentiment of love is developed in the family experience in its many facets of abnegation, affection, kindness, and tenderness. With this training in the home, the spirit becomes capable of loving with greater magnitude and depth, reaching out to society, the spirit's universal family. So with those beautiful words, I think it sums it up well. I'm going to end now, but at least end my talk. Lena, if there's any questions or comments, we could have perhaps a little discussion here. I've only been like 40 minutes, but I'll leave it up to you. So I thank you all for your patience, and I hope I'll be able to seed some ideas to you all and some interest, so that will encourage you to delve a little deeper into this topic and to more into Spiritism in general.
Hi, David. Thank you so much for the lecture. It was beautiful. We don't have questions at this moment, but I wanted to pick your mind a little bit, if you don't mind. When we did the study, we talked about some of these opportunities for growth that we call challenging opportunities in relationships that we have in families, and sometimes it's really hard to understand why we get along with some of our family members, and we have hard times dealing with others. Do you have anything that your thoughts about?
Well, although I understand and I agree and I suffer, I can recognize people that I get along with and others that I don't. But I think the first thing I always try to tell myself is never judge others, okay? And if you have a reaction against someone, it's always in yourself. It's not the other person. It's the way you were reacting to that other person. Maybe that other person had some relationship with you, and you maybe did something bad to the other person in the past life. Majority of cases, that's not the truth. They're the same. But again, when we have reactions and feelings that are not positive towards someone else, it's an opportunity to say, why? What is it inside me that's wrong with me? The old famous thing, if you point your finger at someone, you're pointing 3 back to yourself, right? You point at someone, you got 3 back to yourself. So use that as an opportunity to learn and do analysis. I mean, know thyself is the biggest thing, Yeah. So I'm not sure that answers your comments, but that's what I can offer.
And I found interesting about your family story. You talk yourself. We all have skeletons in our closets. I guess right. that's what we have. Right. But the way you brought it was a lot lighter, I guess. It maybe as we mature, we think we probably learn to deal with situations a lot better. Right. As we ourselves, as Joanna says, we ourselves have to grow into this bigger star and having other planets, other stars around us. So I guess life
Absolutely.
is a process of growing up and regrouping, I guess.
Yeah, let me just share another story. Because really, this study I've been reading and studying these last 3-4 weeks since you asked me to do this talk, and started to reflect so much on my own family. But coincidentally, I have a son who lives in Australia. I'm very close to him, even though he's from my first marriage, and I left, well, my first wife and I separated when he was only 4 years old. And I went to live in Brazil. I got a company transfer, which worked out well. It was very difficult at the time. But all credit to my ex-wife. She maintained that relationship and my son with me. And even when I think he was only 6 years old, he came out to Brazil on his own and spent time with me. And so that bond developed. But anyway, long story short, he's now living in Australia and he's been working for Microsoft. And a few weeks ago, he was promoted. And then 2 weeks after that, he was made redundant. Yeah. And what it wasn't his work, obviously, because he'd just been promoted. He was in a high-level job. But the area in which he was working in, Microsoft decided worldwide. He was basically involved with the search engine. You can't compete against Google, but they changed direction. So the function that he had just disappeared. He was responsible for the whole of Southeast Asia, just disappeared. And they offered him a redundancy package, which he could take, and then they said, well, look, we got something here that's somebody's going on medical leave for a year, and it was quite an interesting position, and we'll hold the redundancy package, so there's still, I think, in a year's time, you can still take it. But a while ago, he started getting very interested in psychology. And partly, again, through the company, because he got involved with someone who was helping to structure a department which gives support, psychological support, because people are getting stressed at work these days. Yeah. And Microsoft, being quite an advanced company, we're working heavily in this area, and he got involved in that. And he decided to, I think about 18 months ago, back to study, even though he's got 2 young children. He's doing psychology. And coincidentally, when I was working all this and thinking about family, and he calls me and says, I've been doing therapy for a while, and we got talking, and we entered into a whole new level of connection because he's got this interest in psychology. He knew about my Spiritism interest, and he knows how much it's changed me. But we never really talked about that either. So I'd already left him. Last time we were in Australia a couple of years ago, and I left him the book, Changing Lives Through Spiritism, the book by, oh gosh, you know what I mean. Anyway, but it's a very good book. But he never read it. But now he's reading it, and we're connecting at more of a spiritual level. So again, this family constellations, I don't know whether it's spiritual, there's energy, there's connection, but we just got to another level, and I'm sure it's got to be related to this study. So it's made me think a lot, and again, I'm very, very grateful for this opportunity.
I guess now that we're talking, it reminds me of the orbits of the planet. Sometimes we are closer to the sun, and sometimes we are farther away, and life goes this tends to bring together what must be together, which is beautiful. But thank you so much.